My name's Colton Hendricks, and today I'm going to talk to you about respirators. There's a lot of information to go over, so we're just going to dive straight in. First one is, what are exactly respirators? Now, I'm just going to give you the definition right off the bat, so we don't have to spend too much time on it. And it is, respirators are devices that covers your mouth and nose to prevent inhalation of contaminants or particulates. Contaminants is anything like in vapors, and then particulates are really solid particles that can be breathed into the lungs. And when it comes to respirators, there's a lot of jobs that involve them. Now, it could range anywhere from woodworking, back when we were in high school or something like that, and it could range all the way up to industrial factories, like doing jobs with air sampling and stuff like that. It's a very wide range. The next thing is the types of respirators. This is very important, so make sure you're paying attention. The first one is an APR. APR stands for air purifying respirators. Now, what makes these different from the rest is that these filters on the front, air goes through them and into you, so that it filters the air and you're not getting any exposure. The next thing is SARS. SARS stand for Supplied Air Respirators. Now, these are different because they have a stationary source that supplies the respirator with air through a hose. Now, there's something else similar to this, just called the SCBA. Now, a lot of people read this and say scuba and think of the underwater diving system, and that's completely different. This stands for Self-Contained Breathing Apparatus. Now, the main reason this is different is because it has that gas cylinder that feeds air through a hose, but it's on the back of the worker rather than on a stationary source. It is also used in IDLH atmospheres, as well as 19% or less oxygen atmospheres. The next thing is filter classes. This is also important. The first one is N series, and I'm going to show you that this is a regular dust mask you can buy anywhere, and it's an N95, what is suggested to use, especially now in the pandemic. And you can tell what kind of class it is by reading the front. This says N95, and obviously it doesn't give you a massive amount of protection. It just has that one filter on it. And these types of filters are used in atmospheres free of oil-based aerosols. So if it's in the environment, this is already eliminated. The next thing is R series. These remove any particles going through it, as well as any of the oil-based aerosols. And this is similar to the P series, except that the P series show no sign of degradation, which means it could be 2 years old and it would look almost brand new. Now, that's it for the filters. The next thing I want to go over is the parts of the respirator. Now, with the parts of the respirators, there's not a vast majority of things you need to know, but there's just a few I need to make sure you guys get. The first one is the straps, and we got, of course, that's very self-explanatory. And it's really elastic that can either be buttoned up into it and also a pull. And then there's inhalation valves. There's usually two or maybe even one of where the air comes into the wearer. Okay. The next thing is the exhalation valve. It's usually one, and it's right in front, and it's where the air is exhaled out of the respirator. Next thing I want you guys to know is what an employee's responsibility is when it comes to respirators. There's not a very big amount of them, but they are important. The first one is employees must properly check the respirator before each use. I'll get into what is exactly a respirator check later, but just so you guys know, you guys have to do that. The next thing is employees must properly use, store, and maintain respirators. I'll get into that a little bit later as well, but as long as you guys know that you guys are doing this, there's no blowback. Next thing is employer responsibilities. This is important because their role in the process is way more important. First one I want to go over is employers must determine the chemicals present as well as any unknown chemicals in the atmosphere. Just because you think you know every chemical in the atmosphere doesn't mean that eventually one day one unknown chemical comes in. That's why you need to make sure you're testing every so often for any unknown chemicals to make sure that you guys are safe. Next one is employers must conduct physicals on workers before, during, and at the conclusion of employment. There's a few reasons why they do this. The main reason they do it before and during is to make sure that the worker is healthy, to make sure that whenever they're using that respirator, they're not going to get affected, as well as to see if they're fit to even use the respirator. And lastly, the conclusion of employment. They do that because they want to make sure that any type of illness that the worker that could get later isn't on them, that he used the respirator exactly how they wanted to. The next one is employers must research, supply, and repair the respirators. I'll get into exactly how you'll do that later, but just so the employers know that this is their responsibility. They cannot tell the worker they have to do this. Next one, employers must conduct fit tests annually. Now, I'll get into exactly what a fit test is later, just like some of the other things. And there's a little bit to it, but it's not that difficult. You'll get it instantly almost. Next one, employers must provide training to workers about respirators. That's why a few of you guys are here today, because y'all are getting a new job or new career that involves using respirators and you need to be trained. That's it for employer responsibility. Now we'll move on to how to use a respirator. There's a few steps to it. The first one is the respirator check. Now, I got my respirator here with me to show you exactly what I mean whenever it comes to a respirator check. It wants you to disassemble the respirator and check the seals and straps for any signs of damage. Now, this is a very simple way. So you've got your filter that easily just pops off. Both sides do that, okay? And inside the filter, you unfold it, you got your seals, and you got that on both sides, okay? You want to make sure that those aren't scratched or damaged in any way. And you also want to check the straps. Now, these can get stretched over time and might need to be repaired. And then also, you never know, it could be cut or damaged in some way. If these straps don't keep it snug on your face, it could lead to exposure, which is what you do not need to do. Next one is use. When using the respirator, make sure that it's tight to the face like I just said, and there's no gaps, because then using the respirator is just kind of redundant. Next one is maintenance and storage. When done using the respirator, gently put the respirator down. So don't be tossing it around and throwing it up against walls and stuff. I'm not saying you will, but I have seen cases where that happens. And also, you want to keep the filters up so they aren't getting contaminated by any particles on the ground or the shelf, wherever they're sitting. And you want to keep them warm and dry. So the filters on those respirators are meant for a specific thing. And if they get contaminated by water or anything cold, it could change how it works and you could be at risk. So it's best to just keep them warm and dry. Next thing is disposal. Now, there is no requirement when it comes to disposal, but they do ask that if you have a bunch of filters that you're throwing out, put it in a separate garbage can, label it, and then throw it out with your regular garbage. The trash can company knows what to do with that and will take it no problem. The next thing is fit testing. Fit testing is a very important, especially for employers, so make sure you're paying attention. There's two different types. The first one I'm going to talk about is quantitative fit testing. This one is where there are instruments placed inside and outside of the face mask, and then they measure any type of leakage from the respirator. This type of fit test usually is the second choice because of how expensive it is, and as well as the professional charges a lot for his experience. So it's best to just choose the latter, which is qualitative. The latter choice is the qualitative fit testing. This is a little different because the worker wears a respirator and a hood is placed over it. That is whenever he is introduced to a non-hazardous chemical and measures his reaction. If he reacts, then obviously the face piece is not on his face as it should be. That's it for my presentation. I want to say a quick thank you to Craig Colton as well as John Kinsey for their information through their books. It was quite helpful.